So anyway, active post-conflict education and equity is something that I wanted to discuss, and I think this will be an interesting way for us to move through our discussion on This Week when we aren't live. So some key questions to consider as we move forward with our idea about conflict in education and equity. One is, I think that we have to continue to think, what is globalization and what is equity? And I'm going to post another screencast looking at some of those issues specifically. But I'd like for us to think, what are the definitions that we've seen so far? Globalization being what? We have discussed it as the transmission of knowledge, skills, goods, and services across traditional boundaries. Those could be local, like, within country boundaries. Those could be national boundaries. Those could be regional boundaries. But we thought about it as that sort of transition or interaction or exchange of knowledge, skills, goods, and services across whatever boundary it is we're talking about. Now, there are many different ways to define it, and it's certainly something that there's a lot of debate on, so I'm not claiming that we're going to wrap it all up just with that one statement, but at least it's a way to start. And we've got our issue of equity, and our equity issue is really hinging on two terms right now in class, that being, on the one hand, equality, and on the other hand, parity. And one of the things that we've talked about related to our Saudi Arabian example from another screencast in our class conversation is that parity is not the same as equality. In other words, having equal access to something is maybe different than just achieving at the same rate or attaining at the same rate. And so we have to think about the quality and the character of lived experiences probably as much as we have to think of just the raw levels of achievement or attainment or whatever it is that we're talking about. All right, so globalization and equity are terms that we're going to continue to think about in meaningful ways, I hope, not just through the end of this class, but on into your career. Secondly, how can we apply the theory and knowledge of unfolding globalization developments to create an understanding of its impact on education and equity? Excuse me. Well, that's pretty important. So what are unfolding globalization developments? Right? What does that mean? Well, that's a good question, I think, because we've talked a lot about how there are multinational organizations or there are international NGOs that are part of that organization that would spread shared ideas or expectations about education. We've talked about economic globalization in terms of the ways that labor market potential and goods and services can develop and spread and exchange worldwide. So we have to think of, first of all, how we're defining globalization again. And then we can think about what does it mean for equity in education. Third, how can the field of comparative education help us sharpen our understanding of globalization and equity? Well, that's I think a pretty important question for us. One of the things that we try to do in comparative and international education is to meaningfully compare. And by doing that, we try to consider forces of globalization as well as the role of contextualization. In fact, that's the name of a class that you take in the CIE program, right? So how do larger cross-national pressures or ideologies or expectations or norms or values or whatever integrate with or conflict with local or community or somehow more contextualized expectations, norms, values, etc., etc. Well, I think it does a couple of things, and you can tell me if you agree or not. I think comparative education helps us because it gives us an opportunity to actually look at what is done in other places and remarkably and systematically put side by side things that we can hopefully isolate that might represent either globalization or equity. Right? So even though Saudi Arabia, to use our old example, and the United States are very different in culture and in community and in the status of the nation state in the world system, right? Even though it's very different in all of those ways, And even though we have very different ideas about gender, whereas one system is coeducational and gender integrated, another system is formally gender segregated. Right? And both of them, share ideas about equity or equality, and what it means for boys and girls or men and women to be equal. And we have very different definitions of what that means. Part of that, or maybe a lot of that, due to the fact that we come from particular and unique societies and cultures. However, we're both talking about gender equality, regardless of the fact that we have unique, perhaps lived experiences and definitions of it. So, comparative education helps us look at those sorts of things systematically, put them in stark context, consider the integration of globalization and contextualization as we move forward with that, among many other points as well. And then number 4, what kinds of responses to the effects of globalization on equity can we provide as scholars or as educators? Right? What kinds of responses to the effects of globalization on equity? How does globalization impact equity? Again, we know that there's an element of exchange of knowledge, exchange of skills, goods, and services. All right? So knowledge about equity, skills for attaining equity perhaps, goods and services that might be equitably provided or developed or whatever. Right? Those could be ways that globalization impacts equity. Or if we want to take a more critical approach, we could say maybe the knowledge is how to reproduce inequality. Or maybe the skills are skills for ways that we can create new situations of stratification and differentiation to benefit one group over another. Or maybe the goods and services are offered unequally between genders, between socioeconomic status groups, between racial and ethnic groups. Right? So how do we respond to that as scholars and educators? Well, one of the things that we can think about is education in conflict and post-conflict situations or contexts. Right? That would be a unique way that we could look at the way that globalization and education can interact around a particular and important equity issue. Well, let's start by looking at this a little more broadly. If we want, we can look at Peter Buckland, the World Bank Senior Education Specialist. You want to email him? There it is. He has said, and I'm sorry it gets cut off there at the end, I'll read it all to you. He has said that education does not cause wars, nor does it end them. It does, however, frequently contribute to the factors that underlie conflict and also has the potential to play a significant role both directly and indirectly in building peace, restoring countries to a positive development path, and reversing the damage wrought by civil war in particular. Well, let's start with a couple of these statements. First of all, education does not cause wars, nor end them. I suppose this is similar to saying that guns don't kill people, people kill people. Maybe that's a similar argument to that. I have a little trouble with this because I think that a lot of what causes wars or armed conflict has to do with information and the flow of information. Or what people think they know versus what they do know. So maybe some people think that another group has taken away something that they shouldn't have, and that would cause conflict. Or maybe one group is not willing to negotiate with another because of things they know about that other group's history or past. So I have a little trouble with that. Not that education itself is the cause of war, maybe not particularly, but the effects of education might lead to some sort of conflict that could be escalated into violent and armed conflict. I don't know what you think about that. I'd be interested in your thoughts. Does education cause wars, and does it end them or not? Peter Buckland goes on to say that it does, however, frequently contribute to the factors that underlie conflict and also has the potential to play a significant role both directly and indirectly in building peace, restoring countries, blah, blah, blah. Let's start here. It does frequently contribute to the factors that underlie conflict. Well, that is what I was just talking about, right? So maybe there are some factors related to conflict that could be also related to knowledge and skill transmission or exchange, right? Which is a way of thinking about education. Or maybe it has to do with the socialization effects of education. Maybe education socializes people to believe certain things, or to think of themselves in a certain way, or to identify with particular religious or political or ethnic groups. Maybe all of those things, right? Now those would certainly be factors that contribute to conflict in some way. But it also has the potential to play a significant role both directly and indirectly in building peace. Okay, so for the same reasons that it might contribute to the factors that underlie conflict, education can also directly and indirectly build peace by disabusing people of particular misconceptions, by educating people to understand the importance of negotiation and peace resolution. It can help in terms of understanding processes that can be used to resolve conflict and ways to articulate or communicate when there have been perceived wrongs or there need to be some sort of diplomatic or other types of negotiations going on. I mean, education can play a role in all of those things. And the positive, I guess, outcome of that is that Peter Buckland says education can restore countries to a positive development path and reverse the damage wrought by civil war. That is a huge statement, by the way. Reverse the damage wrought by civil war. Holy smoke. I'm not sure I have a comment for that, other than that is a pretty strong statement of the impact or the effect of education in conflict and post-conflict situations. Okay, I'm going to pause here and come back with the next part of the screencast.